Anthony Carbone would later say that everything fell apart because of one slap at one party on one careless night. But the truth was that the moment he put his hands on Pilar Wayne in a crowded Dallas ballroom, his future was already sealed. He just didn't know it yet. The fundraiser at the Roosevelt Ballroom in the spring of 1976 was supposed to be uneventful, a polished evening of speeches, champagne, and polite applause for veterans' charities. Nearly 600 guests in tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns moving beneath chandeliers, while a jazz quartet played near the stage. Pilar Wayne attended alone on behalf of her husband, John Wayne, who was filming in New Mexico and had sent his regrets along with a sizable donation. She stood near the bar speaking with a pair of oil executives about the foundation's expansion plans when Anthony Carbone first noticed her from across the room. Carbone had arrived late, already flushed from drinking at his own private club beforehand. Eager to impress two associates he had brought as guests. He was 39, broad-shouldered, expensively dressed, and newly confident after relocating from Chicago to Texas, where he ran two after-hours establishments that quietly hosted high-stakes card games in back rooms accessible only through coded knocks. He wasn't a top figure in any syndicate, but he had connections strong enough to make small businessmen nervous and enough cash flow to mistake influence for immunity. As he approached Pilar, he made a comment about her dress that she politely ignored. He moved closer, the scent of whiskey heavy on his breath, and asked if she was enjoying herself. She responded courteously but briefly, signaling disinterest. Carbone interpreted restraint as invitation. He placed his hand at the small of her back as if they were old acquaintances. She stepped forward out of reach. He followed and lightly caught her wrist, smiling for the benefit of his friends who were watching from a few feet away. Pilar calmly removed his hand and informed him she was married. Carbone laughed and asked to whom. When she answered that she was Mrs. Wayne, a flicker of recognition crossed his face, but it was quickly buried under bravado. He muttered that her husband wasn't there. The oil executive beside her shifted uncomfortably and told Carbone to ease off. Instead, Carbone leaned in and said something crude enough that the executive stiffened and Pilar's expression hardened. She told him firmly not to touch her again. At that moment, a few nearby guests had begun paying attention. Security staff at the entrance noticed the tension and started moving in their direction. Carbone, feeling eyes on him and unwilling to appear dismissed in front of his associates, grabbed Pilar's wrist again, tighter this time. She reacted instantly and slapped him across the face. The crack was sharp but contained, a defensive act meant to end the exchange. What happened next detonated the room. Without hesitation, Carbone struck her back across the cheek with an open hand. The sound echoed under the chandeliers and silenced the jazz quartet mid-measure. Conversations halted. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Pilar staggered half a step, but did not fall. A red imprint bloomed on her cheek as security rushed in and seized Carbone by the arms. He shouted that she had hit him first, that it was a misunderstanding, that everyone should relax. But the room's mood had shifted from festive to stunned disbelief. Several guests positioned themselves between Pilar and the commotion, while hotel staff escorted Carbone toward the exit as he struggled and cursed, his earlier swagger dissolving into belligerent indignation. Outside, he was pushed into the street, where he continued shouting until one of his associates physically pulled him away. Inside, ice was pressed gently against Pilar's face. She insisted she was fine. She declined medical attention. She declined to involve the police beyond a brief statement to hotel security. She told concerned guests she didn't want to escalate matters or distract from the fundraiser's purpose. Within 30 minutes, she had left quietly through a side entrance. She did not call her husband that night, reasoning that he was working and that the bruise would fade. But 3 attendees placed calls of their own before midnight. One reached Wayne's production manager, another contacted a mutual friend in Los Angeles, and a third spoke directly to a studio executive who happened to know the film set's location. By the time the message reached John Wayne in his trailer outside Santa Fe, the story had traveled faster than Carbone's fading temper. Wayne listened without interruption. He asked whether Pilar required medical care. He asked whether witnesses were certain about the identity of the man, and he asked where that man lived. Those present in the trailer later said he did not raise his voice or slam a fist or curse. He simply removed his reading glasses, folded them carefully, and stared at the wall for a long moment before saying he would return to Texas immediately. Back in Dallas, Anthony Carbone was nursing a bruised ego and boasting to his inner circle that the situation would blow over, that celebrities were all talk, that he had dealt with bigger problems before. He believed connections insulated him, that a few apologies arranged through intermediaries would smooth everything out. What he did not understand, what he could not calculate in any ledger or gambling table odds, was that some men do not shout when they are angry. Some men do not send warnings through third parties. And some lines, once crossed in public under bright lights before hundreds of witnesses, cannot be stepped back over. By the time Carbone finally went to sleep that night, convinced the worst had already passed, the wheels that would dismantle his clubs, fracture his alliances, and turn his own protectors against him had already begun to turn. He had mistaken restraint for weakness, silence for surrender, and a single impulsive strike for a minor incident. It would prove to be the most expensive miscalculation of his life. By the time John Wayne returned to Dallas the next afternoon, Anthony Carbone had already convinced himself the scandal would fade into rumor. But Wayne had not flown home for rumor. He had flown home for resolution. When he stepped inside and saw the bruise darkening along Pilar's cheek, he didn't react outwardly. He studied it in silence, then asked only whether Carbone had tried to contact her again. When she said no, he suggested she stay with relatives for a few days. Not out of fear, but out of caution. That evening, Wayne contacted Frank D'Angelo, a former Marine who now handled discreet security matters across Texas. By the next day, D'Angelo delivered a full profile. Anthony Carbone, 39, Chicago transplant, 2 Fort Worth clubs, 1 operating illegal card games behind a members-only lounge. Reported income modest. Actual income significantly higher. More importantly, Carbone answered to Salvatore Marino, a regional figure known for keeping operations quiet and avoiding unnecessary attention, especially involving celebrities. Wayne read the file carefully and asked one unusual question. How quickly could a large reinforced livestock crate be built and delivered anonymously? Within 48 hours, it was done. Just after 3 a.m., a 6-foot oak crate with steel hinges was placed squarely across Carbone's driveway, blocking his garage. Inside was a single typed note. Next time, it won't be empty. At 7:40 that morning, Carbone opened his front door and froze. He circled the crate once, lifted the lid, read the message, and immediately called Salvatore Marino. Marino arrived within the hour, his expression shifting from irritation to concern once he heard the full story. When Carbone admitted the woman he had struck was married to John Wayne, Marino went quiet. He explained that certain public figures were considered off-limits for a reason. Drawing attention invited scrutiny. Scrutiny invited federal interest. Carbone had not just embarrassed himself, he had created risk. When Carbone dismissed Wayne as just an actor, Marino gestured toward the crate and asked whether actors normally delivered 6-foot messages before sunrise. The point was clear. This was calculated. Marino ordered Carbone to arrange an apology immediately and warned him that the organization would not shield him if things escalated. For the first time, Carbone realized he stood alone. After several tense days and reluctant intermediaries, a meeting was set at White Rock Lake just before sunset. Carbone arrived with 2 associates who stayed back. Wayne arrived alone. They stood several feet apart as the sun dipped lower. Carbone apologized, blamed alcohol, claimed ignorance. Wayne listened without interruption. Then he stated calmly that drunkenness did not excuse grabbing and striking a woman in public. He handed Carbone a manila folder. Inside were copies of financial discrepancies from Carbone's clubs, dual ledgers, underreported income, offshore transfers. Wayne explained that duplicates existed elsewhere. If his family were ever approached again, the documents would go to federal authorities. No shouting, no threats, just consequences outlined in plain terms. As the meeting ended and Wayne drove away, Carbone understood something that unsettled him more than the crate had. The message was not about violence. It was about leverage. And in his world, leverage was far more dangerous. For 2 weeks, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Anthony Carbone kept his distance, closed his clubs early, and reassured his associates that the situation was handled. But humiliation has a way of festering. The image of that crate in his driveway, and of himself standing alone at White Rock Lake, replayed in his mind. He began asking questions about how John Wayne had obtained his financial records. Those questions reached people they shouldn't have. One night, Frank D'Angelo was attacked outside his office. Two men left him with cracked ribs and a fractured jaw, delivering a simple warning: stay out of business that isn't yours. Wayne visited D'Angelo in the hospital the next morning. He said little, but by the end of that day, federal agents were executing search warrants on both of Carbone's clubs. The books matched the copies in Wayne's folder exactly. 2 sets of ledgers, years of unreported income, clear tax violations. No one could prove who sent the information, but everyone assumed. Salvatore Marino called an emergency meeting. When Carbone arrived expecting support, he found distance instead. An IRS investigation meant federal attention. Federal attention meant risk, not just to him, but to everyone connected. Marino made it clear. The organization would not burn itself to protect a man who had ignored orders and drawn heat. Within days, Carbone was indicted on tax evasion and illegal gambling charges. His assets were frozen. His clubs were shuttered. The same men who once laughed at his jokes stopped returning his calls. He eventually accepted a plea deal. 5 years. When he was released, he relocated under a different name to a small town in Missouri. No clubs, no associates, no late-night swagger. Just quiet shifts at a warehouse and a rented apartment over a hardware store. Back in Texas, Pilar returned home. The bruise faded. Life resumed its rhythm. John Wayne never spoke publicly about what happened. He never made a threat in anger. He never touched Carbone. He sent a crate. He had a conversation. And he allowed consequences to unfold naturally. Among certain circles, the story lingered, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson. There are lines that cannot be crossed. And sometimes the most powerful response isn't fury. It's restraint.